The deafening silence of deep space still echoes in my ears. Even after all these years, the memories of that fateful mission cling to my mind like alien parasites, sucking away my sanity with each passing day. I am, or rather, was, Commander Jack Harper of Apollo 23, the mission the world forgot. Or rather, the mission the world was forced to forget. You must be wondering why you've never heard of Apollo 23. Well, that's the point, isn't it? Some stories are buried so deep that not even starlight can reach them. But today, as I feel the weight of years and secrets consuming me, I've decided it's time for the truth to come out, no matter what the cost. It was 1972, and the Apollo program was coming to an end. The public had lost interest in our lunar adventures, and the government was eager to redirect funds to other priorities. But behind the scenes, something much more sinister was happening. Something that would change the course of human history, and my life, forever. I was summoned to a top-secret meeting at the Pentagon on a cold October night. General Hawthorne, a man with steely eyes and an expression that seemed carved from granite, welcomed me into his office. "Harper," he said, his voice low and grave, "what I'm about to tell you will never leave this room." "Understood," I nodded, feeling a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature. The general slid a folder across the table, marked with the tallest confidentiality stamp I'd ever seen. "Apollo 23, he said simply. "A mission that officially doesn't exist." When I opened the folder, my eyes went wide. The photos were impossible. Perfect geometric structures on the hidden face of the moon, captured by top-secret reconnaissance satellites. "What the hell is that, sir?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "That, Commander Harper, is why you and your team are going to the moon. Not to plant flags or collect rocks, but to make first contact." My heart raced. First contact. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "Contact with what exactly, sir?" The general leaned forward, his eyes piercing mine. "With whatever built those structures. Extraterrestrial intelligence, Harper. And you're going to be the first human to find it." In the months that followed, we trained in absolute secrecy. My team consisted of just two other astronauts, Dr. Elias Stern, a brilliant astrobiologist with an intense gaze that seemed to see through people, and Lieutenant Samantha Cole, a communications specialist with nerves of steel and a sharp intuition. The launch took place in the middle of the night, away from the eyes of the public and the press. As the rocket tore through the night sky, I couldn't help thinking that we were setting off on a journey from which we might never return. The journey to the moon was tense, filled with systems checks and rehearsals of first contact protocols that seemed absurdly inadequate in the face of the unknown that awaited us. Elias spent hours studying photos of the structures, muttering increasingly fantastic theories. Samantha, on the other hand, maintained an almost supernatural calm, as if she were preparing for an imminent storm. When we finally orbited the moon, directing our spacecraft towards the hidden side, the silence inside the capsule became oppressive. Alien structures filled our vision, crystalline towers that seemed to absorb and reflect starlight in impossible ways. "My God," whispered Elias, his pale face reflected in the ship's window. "It's real. It's really real." We began the landing procedures, our hearts hammering in our chests. As we approached the lunar surface, something strange began to happen. Our communications with Earth became distorted, filled with static and incomprehensible whispers. "Control, this is Apollo 23. Are you receiving us?" Samantha's voice was firm, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Only static responded. And then, when we were just a few meters from the surface, all the ship's systems simply shut down. The lights went out, the engines fell silent, and we were left drifting in the void. "What's happening?" I shouted, struggling with the inert controls. Before anyone could answer, a bright light flooded the cabin, so intense that I had to close my eyes. When I opened them again, we were no longer on the ship. We were standing, still in our spacesuits, in the center of a vast alien chamber. The walls pulsed with a bluish light, and impossible shapes floated in the air around us. And then, in the deepest silence I've ever experienced, a voice rang out in our minds. "Welcome, explorers. We've been waiting for you." The terror I felt at that moment is something that haunts me to this day. It was just the beginning of a nightmare that would change not only our lives, but potentially the fate of all humanity. As I watched the alien shapes approaching us, a dark certainty settled into my core. The Apollo 23 mission had begun for real, and with it, a journey into the darkest reaches of the universe and the human soul itself. Time seemed to have lost all meaning in that alien chamber. It could have been minutes or hours since we heard that voice in our minds. My spacesuit, designed to protect me in the hostile vacuum of space, suddenly seemed fragile and inadequate in the face of the overwhelming presence that surrounded us. The floating shapes around us began to solidify, taking on contours that defied human comprehension. They weren't exactly bodies, but patterns of light and shadow that moved with hypnotic fluidity. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat, as if my own body refused to disturb the supernatural silence. It was Elias who finally broke the silence. "Who? What are you?" His voice trembled, a mixture of fear and scientific fascination. The answer came not in words, but in a series of images that flooded our minds. Glimpses of distant worlds, civilizations that were born and died before life on Earth even took its first steps. Technologies so advanced that they seemed like magic. It was overwhelming, beautiful, and absolutely terrifying. "We are the Watchers," the mental voice rang out again, this time accompanied by a sense of incomprehensible age. "We have been here since the beginning of time, guiding the evolution of the cosmos." I felt my knees go weak, and it wasn't just the effect of the altered gravity. The implication of those words was inconceivable. "Did you create life on Earth?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. A sense of amusement emanated from the entities. "Create? No. Guide, shape, sometimes interfere. Your species has been a particularly interesting experiment." Experiment. The word echoed in my mind like a death sentence. Beside me, I saw Samantha turn pale, her usual composure disintegrating at the revelation. "Why did you bring us here?" she asked, her voice betraying a tremor of fear. The alien shapes pulsed, and I felt a wave of anticipation. "The time has come to advance the experiment to the next phase. You three have been chosen to be the catalysts." Before we could process what that meant, the chamber around us began to transform. The walls dissolved into a vortex of light and color, and I felt as if I were falling into an infinite abyss. When the vertigo passed, I found myself back on Earth. We were on a street in a city that seemed strangely familiar, but something was terribly wrong. The sky had a sickly purple hue, and the people around us moved like puppets, their eyes empty and lifeless. "What is it?" I shouted, my heart hammering in my chest. "What have you done?" The Watcher's voice resounded in our minds, now with a tone of clinical coldness. "This is a possible future, one of the many paths your species can take. You will be our eyes and ears, experiencing each potential reality." Icy horror coursed through my veins as I understood what this meant. We were guinea pigs in a cosmic experiment, forced to witness and live alternative futures for humanity. The scenes began to change rapidly. I saw cities in ruins, consumed by an alien and hostile nature. I witnessed wars fought with weapons that defied the laws of physics. I experienced the ecstasy and terror of collective minds, where individuality was only a distant memory. In each reality, I felt parts of me being ripped out and replaced. Memories, emotions, even my very notion of self seemed fluid and malleable in the hands of the Watchers. "Stop!" I heard Elias shout at one point, his voice laden with agony. "We can't stand it." But the Watchers were implacable. "You must experience it. You must understand. Only then can we determine the best path for your species." The visions continued, each one more disturbing than the last. I saw versions of myself committing unimaginable acts. I saw humanity transcend and become something beyond comprehension. I saw our planet reduced to ashes by our own greed and stupidity. At some point, I lost track of who I originally was. Jack Harper, the commander of Apollo 23, seemed like a distant memory, a dream from another life. I was all the versions of myself that I had experienced, and at the same time, I was none of them. When we finally returned to the alien chamber, I fell to my knees, panting and shaking. I looked at Elias and Samantha, and saw in their eyes the same horror and confusion I felt. "What? What have we done?" Samantha muttered, her voice broken. The Watchers floated around us, their forms pulsing with an energy that now seemed malevolent and predatory. "You did what was necessary," the experiment continues. At that moment, I understood that our mission, our very existence, had been corrupted beyond all recognition. We were no longer just astronauts on a secret mission. We were pawns in a cosmic game, our minds and souls at the mercy of entities whose motives were beyond our comprehension. And worst of all, that was only the beginning. As the observers prepared to subject us to more experiments, I struggled to retain a vestige of my humanity. But deep down, a terrible certainty was settling in. Apollo 23 was not a mission of exploration. It was a sentence of damnation, not just for the three of us, but potentially for the entire human race. Time became a cruel illusion. Days, weeks, perhaps years passed as we were subjected to the observers and experiments. Each session left us more worn out, our minds fragmenting under the weight of alternative realities and distorted futures. Elias was the first to show signs of collapse. His scientific brilliance, once a source of fascination and discovery, was now turning against him. He spent hours muttering incomprehensible equations, desperately trying to rationalize the irrational. "You don't understand," he shouted during a rare moment of lucidity. "They're not just showing us possible futures, they're turning us into vectors, agents of change." Samantha, on the other hand, closed in on herself. Her eyes, once lively and alert, now seemed empty, as if an essential part of her had been torn away. Sometimes I would catch her whispering in alien languages we weren't supposed to know, her fingers tracing strange symbols in the air. As for me, I struggled to maintain a sense of identity, clinging to the memories of who I was before this hellish mission. But it was a losing battle. Each new vision, each alternative reality, eroded a little more of my sanity. It was during one of these sessions that something unexpected happened. We were being forced to experience a future where Earth had been transformed into an interplanetary mining colony. The sky was darkened by alien machinery, and humanity had been reduced to little more than slaves. Suddenly, in the middle of that apocalyptic vision, I saw something that shouldn't have been there: the face of General Hawthorne. The vision flickered, like a transmission with interference, and for a brief moment I heard his voice. "Harper, you must resist. They are not what they appear to be." Before I could process what was happening, I was violently torn from that reality and thrown back into the Watcher's chamber. My heart was beating frantically, and a cold sweat covered my skin inside the spacesuit. "What was that?" I demanded, my voice hoarse with exhaustion and fear. "What are you hiding from us?" The luminous forms of the Watchers pulsed with a menacing intensity. "Your mind is creating illusions to protect itself," the collective voice resounded in my head. "The experiment must continue without interference." But something had changed. A seed of doubt had been planted in my torn mind, and with it, a spark of hope, or perhaps just another form of madness. In the breaks between sessions, I began to observe our surroundings more closely. The alien chamber, which had previously seemed a completely alien environment, now showed disturbingly familiar details. The curvature of certain structures resembled the architecture of military bases I knew on Earth, and the light patterns, why did they sometimes flash in sequences that resembled Morse code? I tried to share my suspicions with Elias and Samantha, but it was hard to know if they were still capable of understanding. Elias just mumbled about superimposed realities and wave function collapse, while Samantha seemed to be in an almost constant state of trance. It was during a particularly intense session that I had my epiphany. We were being subjected to a vision of a future where human consciousness had been digitized, our essence transferred to a vast orbital supercomputer. As I experienced the vertigo of existing as pure information, I noticed an underlying pattern in the data flowing around me. It was a signature I recognized from top-secret military projects I had worked on before Apollo 23. At that moment, all the pieces fell into place. The observers, the visions of the future, the whole mission. It was an elaborate hoax, an advanced simulation designed to, what? Test us, break us, extract information. When we returned to the chamber, I was shaking, not from fear, but from anger. "This isn't real," I declared, my voice firmer than it had been in weeks. "None of this is real." The forms of the Watchers became erratic, pulsing with a frantic frequency. "You're delusional, Commander Harper," the mental voice sounded, but now I could detect a note of panic in it. "The experiment must continue." "No!" I shouted, pulling out sensors that I only now realized were connected to my suit. "No more experiments, no more lies." Elias and Samantha looked at me with a mixture of confusion and fear. "Jack, what are you doing?" Samantha whispered, her voice trembling. "Freeing us," I replied, frantically looking for a way out, something to break the illusion. It was then that the environment around us began to dissolve. The alien walls gave way to familiar metal panels. The thin air was replaced by the recycled atmosphere of a space station, and there, standing before us, was General Hawthorne, his face a mask of worry and guilt. "Welcome back," he said gravely. "I'm sorry for what you had to go through, but it was necessary." As the reality of our situation set in, the farce of the mission, the elaborate simulation, the real purpose behind it all, I felt a new wave of horror overwhelm me, because I realized that, perhaps, the truth was even more terrifying than the fiction we had been living. The shock of the revelation left us stunned. The familiar, albeit claustrophobic, reality of the space station seemed surreal after our experience with the observers. My mind struggled to process the transition, like a computer trying to run incompatible programs simultaneously. "Necessary." I repeated General Hawthorne's word, my voice a mixture of incredulity and growing fury. "You call it necessary to subject us to this nightmare?" Elias, is still disoriented, mumbled incoherently about layers of reality and quantum collapse. Samantha, on the other hand, seemed to be coming out of a deep trance, her eyes finally focusing on her surroundings with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. General Hawthorne maintained his rigid posture, but I could see the weight of guilt in his eyes. "Commander Harper, Dr. Cole, Dr. Stern, I understand that you are confused and angry, but I need you to listen to me. What you have experienced may well have saved humanity." I took a threatening step towards him, my fists clenched. "Saved? You almost destroyed us. Our minds, our souls." "Jack!" Samantha's voice interrupted me, surprisingly firm. "Let him speak. We need to understand." I took a deep breath, trying to contain the storm of emotions that threatened to consume me. The general nodded gratefully at Samantha before continuing. 3 months ago, we received a signal. Not from deep space, as you were led to believe, but from the future. The silence that followed was almost palpable. Even Elias stopped his muttering to stare at the general with wide eyes. "The future," I repeated, incredulity clear in my voice. Hawthorne nodded gravely. "A dark future, one where humanity had evolved in ways we could barely comprehend. They called themselves the Watchers." The realization of what he was implying hit me like a punch in the gut. "So, the aliens? That was us," Samantha added, her voice a horrified whisper. "A future version of humanity?" The general continued. "They warned us about a series of critical events that would lead to that future. Events that, if not avoided, would result in humanity being transformed into something unrecognizable. And you decided that the best way to avoid this was to torture us with simulations?" I spat out the words, anger boiling over again. "It wasn't torture, Harper," Hawthorne retorted, his voice hardening. "It was training, conditioning. The observers provided us with the technology to create these simulations. They insisted it was the only way to prepare humanity for the challenges to come. Elias, who had remained silent until then, suddenly spoke, his voice trembling. The equations, the patterns. I saw it. I understood. It's all about quantum probability and manipulating reality. The general nodded. Exactly, Dr. Stern. What you experienced were condensed versions of potential futures, futures that we need to avoid at all costs. My head spun with the implications. So what happens now? Do you just expect us to go back to Earth and act as if nothing has happened? Hawthorne's expression darkened. It's not that simple, Commander. What you've experienced, the knowledge you've acquired, is dangerous. The three of you are now the most important and potentially dangerous people on the planet. A shiver ran down my spine. What does that mean exactly? It means, he replied slowly, that you have a choice to make. You can return to Earth as secret heroes, working behind the scenes to shape humanity's future. Or what? Samantha asked, her voice laden with apprehension. Or we'll have to take steps to ensure that the knowledge you possess never falls into the wrong hands. The weight of that veiled threat hung over us like a toxic cloud. I looked at Elias and Samantha, seeing in them the same conflict I felt. Were we victims or saviors? Prisoners or guardians of a cosmic secret? What if we refuse to be part of it? I asked, my voice low and dangerous. General Hawthorne looked at me with a mixture of pity and resolution. That's not an option, Commander. The future of humanity is at stake. Sometimes sacrifices must be made for the greater good. At that moment, I understood that our mission had never really ended. In fact, it had only just begun. And the real horror was not the aliens we had encountered, but the impossible choice we now faced. As the silence stretched out on the space station, a dark certainty settled in my heart. No matter what we chose, our lives would never be the same again, and the fate of humanity weighed heavily on our fractured shoulders. The air in the space station seemed charged with static electricity, each breath an effort against the weight of the revelations imposed on us. I looked at Elias and Samantha for some sign of how to proceed, but their faces were masks of confusion and fear. How long? I asked General Hawthorne, my voice hoarse. He looked at me, confused. How long what, Commander? How long were we in that simulation? The words came bitterly out of my mouth. Hawthorne hesitated, and in that hesitation, I saw the truth he was reluctant to reveal. 3 weeks. He finally answered. The shock hit us like a wave. 3 weeks. It seemed like years, decades even. The memories of countless lives and alternative realities swirled in our minds, threatening to swallow us up. Samantha was the first to break the silence. How could you? Her voice shook with restrained anger. You played with our minds, our souls, all in the name of what? A future that might not even happen. The general straightened up, his expression hardening. Dr. Cole, I understand your anger, but you haven't seen what we've seen. The projections, the calculations. To hell with your projections! Elias suddenly exploded, his voice charged with a fury I'd never seen in him before. Do you have any idea what they've done to us? The things we've seen, experienced? I watched Elias with growing concern. His eyes had a feverish gleam, and his hands were shaking uncontrollably. The simulation had affected each of us in different ways, but Elias seemed to be on the verge of a total breakdown. Dr. Stern, Hawthorne began, but I interrupted him. Enough, I said, my voice low but firm. We need time. Time to process, to understand. The general nodded slowly. Understandable. But we don't have the luxury of much time. The decisions you make over the next few days will shape the course of human history. As he spoke, I noticed something strange. A slight tremor in the station, almost imperceptible. Samantha noticed it too, her gaze quickly turning to the nearby control panels. General, she said, her voice tense, is there something wrong with the station's systems? Hawthorne frowned. Not that I know of. Why? Before Samantha could answer, the lights flickered, plunging us momentarily into darkness. When they came back on, the air was filled with a low, unsettling hum. "This isn't part of your plan, is it?" I asked, suspicion growing in my mind. The general's face was pale. "No, that wasn't planned." Suddenly, the screens around us came to life, filled with static and flashes of images that seemed terribly familiar. Fragments of the realities we had experienced in the simulation. Elias let out a strangled cry, falling to his knees and clutching his head. "They're coming back," he shouted. "The Watchers. They're not finished with us." Samantha rushed to the controls, her fingers flying over the keyboards. "That's impossible," she muttered. "The systems are reacting as if we were still in the simulation." An icy shiver ran down my spine. "What if we never left?" I whispered, the terrible possibility forming in my mind. General Hawthorne shook his head violently. "No, that's real. It has to be." But doubt was planted. The walls of the station seemed to ripple, as if reality itself was unfolding around us. "If this is still a simulation," Samantha said, her voice shaking, "then who's in control? The Watchers, or—" She didn't finish her sentence, but she didn't need to. The thought hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. What if it were us? What if our minds, altered and expanded by the experience in the simulation, were somehow affecting the reality around us? Elias, still on the floor, began to mutter a series of complex equations, his glazed eyes fixed on a distant point. "The probabilities, the timelines, are converging." General Hawthorne drew a gun, his eyes flicking from side to side nervously. "This can't be happening. You need to get a grip." But it was too late. The reality around us began to fragment, scenes from alternative futures leaking through the cracks in the fabric of space-time. Amidst the chaos, a terrible certainty solidified in my mind. Our journey was far from over. In fact, we were about to plunge even deeper into the abyss of the unknown. And as the space station dissolved around us, turning into a kaleidoscope of overlapping realities, I wondered if we would ever find our way back. Or if, perhaps, there was no longer a back to return to. Reality shattered around us like a shattered mirror, each fragment reflecting a different future, an alternative possibility. The ringing in my ears intensified into a deafening scream, the voices of billions of versions of humanity echoing through time and space. Elias, still on the ground, had turned into a frenzied oracle, his words a chaotic mix of quantum equations and apocalyptic prophecies. "The lines converge. The observer and the observed become one. We are the observers." Samantha struggled with the station's controls, now more like an interdimensional panel than any known technology. Her fingers danced over constantly changing surfaces, desperately trying to anchor us in some stable reality. General Hawthorne, his weapon still in hand, seemed to melt and recompose himself every second, as if multiple versions of him were fighting for control. "Harper!" he shouted, his voice distorted. "You need to make a choice. Now!" I found myself at the center of this cosmic maelstrom, my mind expanded beyond the limits of human comprehension. Every thought, every decision seemed to branch out into infinite possibilities. It was then that I understood. We weren't just the victims of this experience. We were the architects. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice reverberating through the layers of reality. "All of you, stop!" For a fleeting moment, the chaos froze. Elias, Samantha, and the general stared at me, their faces a mixture of fear and expectation. "All of this," I began, the words heavy on my tongue, "is our creation, the simulation, the Watchers, even this reality. It's all us trying to understand our own potential." Samantha let out a bitter laugh. "So what are we, Jack? Gods? Monsters?" "We're humans," I replied, feeling the weight of countless lives and possibilities in every word. Humans facing the inconceivable, and we have a choice to make. General Hawthorne, his form finally stabilizing, stepped forward. "What choice, Commander?" I took a deep breath, feeling the fate not just of the Earth but of countless realities weighing on my shoulders. We can embrace this power, this expanded consciousness. We can become the Watchers, shaping the destiny of humanity across time and space. Elias raised his head, his eyes shining with a supernatural understanding. "Or we can reject it," he whispered. "Go back." "Go back where?" Samantha asked, her voice trembling. "Is there still where to go back to?" I closed my eyes, searching through the chaos of my expanded mind. And there, almost lost amidst the infinite possibilities, I found a memory of who we were before all this began. "It exists," I said, opening my eyes, "but we have to choose, all of us." General Hawthorne lowered his weapon, understanding finally dawning on his face. It wasn't about preparing for the future, was it? It was about deciding what future we wanted to create. I nodded. And now we have the power to shape that future. But at what cost? For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was deafening, filled only by the low hum of realities intertwining around us. It was Samantha who finally broke the silence. "I choose humanity," she said, her voice firm. "With all its flaws, all its potential, I choose to go back." Elias, slowly getting to his feet, nodded. "Science has always been about understanding our place in the universe, not about becoming the universe. I choose to go back too." General Hawthorne hesitated for a moment, his eyes scanning the visions of possible futures that still danced around us. Finally, he sighed. "My duty has always been to protect humanity. Even if that means protecting it from its own potential, I choose to go back." All eyes turned to me. I could feel the power flowing through me, the temptation to become something more than human. But with that power, I also saw the price, the eternal loneliness of the watchers, condemned to watch but never really live. "I choose to go back," I declared, feeling the weight of those words reverberate through reality. The instant I made my choice, the chaos around us began to calm down. Visions of alternative futures faded, like dreams at dawn. The space station slowly resumed its familiar shape. When the last wave of alternative reality subsided, we found ourselves back where it all began, the control room of the Apollo 23 mission on Earth. Our spacesuits had disappeared, replaced by our ordinary clothes. For a moment, no one moved, fearful that any action could shatter this fragile reality. Then, slowly, Elias began to laugh. A laugh that soon turned into sobs. Samantha hugged him, silent tears streaming down her face. General Hawthorne walked over to the window, looking out at the night sky. "It's over," he muttered. But as I joined him, watching the stars, I couldn't help feeling that something had fundamentally changed. In our minds, echoes of unrealized futures, and knowledge beyond human comprehension still reverberated. "No, General," I replied softly. "It's not over. It's just begun." Because now we knew of humanity's hidden potential, of the dangers and wonders that awaited us among the stars. And with that knowledge came a responsibility. The Apollo 23 mission was over, but our real journey, the journey to shape humanity's destiny, was just beginning. And as the sun rose over the horizon, bringing with it the promise of a new day, I wondered what future we would choose to create.